Hello, everyone. This is Melissa with ATOM. How is everyone today?
Great. Port Gamble Squall.
Okay, should see something pop up on your screen now. All right, so welcome everyone. Today's presentation is part of the Culture Builds Communities webinar series. This community-based project is designed to help Native communities plan and develop cultural facilities. Culture Builds Communities is a project of the Association of Tribal Archives, Libraries, and Museums. It is funded by the Institute of Museum and Library Services and the National Museum of the American Indian. Today's webinar is Pathways to Success, Developing a Strategic Plan, presented by Arthur Wolf. Arthur Wolf is founder and principal of Wolf Consulting in Las Vegas, Nevada. Art has worked with tribes such as the Gila River Indian Tribe, Eastern Shoshone, and White Mountain Apache. Art helps tribal museums and cultural organizations with planning, assessments, and evaluations that enable them to better fulfill their missions. And I will now turn things over to Art.
I'll put this right up now. Thank you. Can we share that, Melissa?
You'll hit share screen for on your PowerPoint.
There we go. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Today, we'll talk generally about strategic planning. And I say generally because there's some principles about the process, but everyone develops their own way of doing things, their own style. And I think that's wonderful. The cohort, each of you is coming together in your own way and tailoring your plans to your community. So you might ask, what is it? What is strategic planning? And why does it mystify so many organizations and so many people? It's really not that difficult a concept. I think that in the past, a lot of strategic planning on a corporate level got a very bad rap because they spend all their time working on the plan and not always on implementation. But for your project, it's a way that you're going to agree on where you want to go and what you want to be. And primarily, it ensures the vision that meets the needs of your community and your audiences. And it allows you to spend time thinking about the resources that you need to get to your vision. And as always, things change. And a good plan will allow you to set up decision-making process to respond to changes in your environment. Many among the cohort are aspiring to become accredited museums by the American Alliance of Museums. And there are a lot of resources on their website at aam-us.org. You'll find those there. When you get to the table to be considered for accreditation, lack of institutional planning is among the leading causes of being tabled and not approved. And it's just a given that an accreditable museum does current, comprehensive, timely, and formal planning for the future. And it's very important to note that your style is your style, and the format and the terms you use are up to you. There is not one standard for that. Sometimes there's confusion about what other plans are out there. Master plans, those relate to developing long-term your facilities, your finances, and your programs up to 10 years out. The annual plan is what ties to your annual budgets, and it supports your larger strategic objectives and your goals. And the other important thing to remember is that you don't have to do the entire plan at once. Implementation plans can be put into your strategic plan so that you know 3 years out, you're going to create an interpretive plan, or you're going to create a curation strategy. And those can be done later on. And again, don't panic. You don't have to do them all at once. You have to imagine them and put them on your radar and make sure you are looking out to accomplish them down the road a bit. Now, again, this is fairly general look overall. Why do you do it? You focus and reaffirm your mission. If you're starting out, it's a great chance to really do a complete view starting out. If you've been around for a long time, it may be that there are opportunities that you didn't envision originally, and so now you can refocus and think ahead. The vision for the future is really important because you want to really make sure that you're doing something exciting, something that draws the passion and the interest and the involvement of both your immediate stakeholders and your community. And you want it to be something that you become. It's not enough just to be, you might want to be becoming all the time. If you've had established programs, you might want to look and see if they need to be expanded or improved or eliminated. It's a good time to put everything on the table and ask yourself if it's really going to support your vision. And a very important part when we can all get together again, I think, is to educate and involve your board members or council members, your staff, your volunteers, and the general members of your community. And as part of this, you will define and prioritize some major goals, some strategies that will help you achieve each of those goals, and then action plans on an annual basis that tie to your budget and link that together. And I can't emphasize that enough. There are some wonderful strategic plans with massive goals bound in leather even, and they sit on the shelf because the link hasn't been made between the lofty goals and the annual actions. Who needs to do it? It's all of you, and we know that you want to, and that's why you're here, and you do want to respond to the challenges you have. I know you see opportunities, and I know you want to serve your stakeholders. Very important. You also want to be sustainable. You might need to change as your community changes, and certainly if you want to be nationally accredited. And basically, everybody needs to have a plan. Now, I was mentioning about the link between your mission and vision and your goals and objectives and your products, milestones and service levels, and your annual action plans and processes. A friend named Will Phillips came up with this idea of EMMA, ends, means, measures, and action systems. And I think that it's, the secret to having a plan that you can actually achieve is to continually strive to align the parts of EMMA. You'll notice that there are time values on there. Your annual plans, the things you'll do in a particular time period, 1 to 5 years, your major goals, 3 to 5, and your ultimate vision over 5 to 10 years. And that's just something to keep in mind. In the resources for this webinar, you'll find a more elaborate version of this and the notion that successful organizations drive from the mission downward, and bureaucratic organizations go from the bottom up. And all the barriers and the challenges and the opportunities aren't always visible when you're standing at the bottom of the mountain going up. Much easier to see some of this if you're looking down and going accordingly. So that helps you with the idea of your timeline. The idea of milestones we can talk about a little more. You may have 1 or 2 major things that you want to accomplish each year in your plan, and it's very helpful sometimes to lay those out year by year and see where you're going. And the other thing to remember is that in all of this, you want to build in at least an annual review of where you are in your plan. If you don't ever review it, you might get 5 years down the road and find out that you forgot to do some things, or you missed some things, or it was impossible to do some things, and you're not ready for it. It might also be that you have a tremendous opportunity when that phone call comes from a private foundation that wants to help you. And so you should be prepared to be flexible. Now, again, there's a lot of ways to go about this. It's really essential that you set goals and establish your strategies to achieve them. If you don't do that, then you might wander from year to year and not be totally focused on your mission and vision in service to your community. The other key thing is if there's not any indication of support and no one's responsible, then things aren't going to happen either. If you assign resources and you don't have them currently, then you need to put it in your plan that you're going to be building those resources or securing them, and have some person responsible for each strategy. It needs to go along with what's your best timetable. If you have a strong seasonal aspect to your community, in other words, if you're overrun with tourists part of the year and there's no one nearby in the winter, then that's a great time to do the planning. You can do a lot of work in a short time, or you can do a little less work over a longer period. In my experience, a good plan can be done over a period of 3 to 5 months. It doesn't have to be a year-long thing. And you can be inclusive broadly in your community, or you can be exclusive to your own committee if you need to be. Whatever happens is going to be iterative. You're going to have drafts, you're going to have meetings, you're going to have back and forth, and everybody who's involved has to be committed. And I think that vision, passion, and commitment are 3 of the most important ingredients that'll put your plan together for you. And it can take money as well as time. If you need to be bringing people from around your community in for periods of time and feed them and pay for travel and so forth, then you might think of that ahead of time, depending on the custom of your community. So who needs to be involved? I think from looking at the histories of the cohort, that people are very good at thinking about size, location, history, and the reasons for planning. And you then need to know, and I think we talked in the prior webinar on starting out, who can help you the most. who can create barriers to your success, and then involve them. And then consider whether you can do it all internally or need help with facilitation and coordination. I don't know, every community is a little different. I don't know if some of you have experienced facilitators who work for tribal government that can help you with this. If you Google, there are thousands of independent professionals who help out with this. Some of them specializing in museums, some of them general work with nonprofits. So that shouldn't be a challenge for you to find. It's good for the director and the committee members who don't have to be the ones who are appear to be leading or pushing any particular idea. When you're starting, you need a broad set of views, and the director is another person at the table. So think about whether you need that help or not. It's important to consider where you are starting, and again, are you updating a plan that's out of date now? Are you contemplating a major change, like a brand new facility? Do you have to coordinate parts of funding the plan with your annual budget process? Are there external pressures in your community or outside your community that may have an impact on the speed or the depth that you can go in your planning? And because you'll be volunteering time from your ongoing day jobs, and you maintain your operation while you're in the planning process. Those are really important questions to consider, all of them. You do want to make a formal process with a timetable, whether it's over weeks or months, and say who's responsible, specific events and activities, and what you expect to come out with at the end, which is usually for institutions some kind of formal approval from a governing body where they basically bless your plan and urge you to get going. Board approval, engaging with stakeholders, very important. It used to be that museum directors would go in a small room and write the plans themselves without talking to too many people and then kind of announce it. Doesn't work that way anymore. Everybody needs to broadly include not only staff, governing body, but the wider community as well. It's important to document the process when you start. It's also important to document meeting notes, decisions that are made at a retreat or a workshop, and then obviously have a final product that can be shared with people. And there are some examples we'll talk about a little later. A lot of the detail is never made public, but the big goals and the strategies, yes. But they don't really need to know the individual responsibilities and the prices and the exact timing of everything. And there are different interesting ways that institutions are portraying that now. Board approval, annual budgets, again, most important to build in periodic reviews and updates, even if it's once a year when you're looking ahead with your budgets for the next year. See how that's all lining up. Look at your potential milestones at that point and say, well, we know we're not going to do that milestone next year, but someone just offered us support to do the milestone from year 3 next year. So let's move the one back and the other one forward. And that way you're controlling the game on the board. It's really important that you know your own organization, that you know your audience, you know your community, and it's important to do benchmarking data where you might compare yourself to others in your region, in your state, other tribal museums, and that's so much easier to do now that there are services like SurveyMonkey where you can uh, find a peer group and invite them once a year or so to share their data, and you share with them, and it can really give you some good feelings about where you compare. It's also good in dealing with your governing body to show that you're not in competition necessarily with others, but to see how you compare to others. Listening sessions, focus groups, formal interviews, and surveys are all important parts of this. And that may be, I know on some of the larger communities that have large districts, you might want to be out doing a listening session in each district so that people who live there who might not come together centrally can weigh in on your ideas and your plans. Focus groups of specific people, formal interviews with leadership and people inside and outside the community, and again, surveys that can be either done online or hard. And then formal assessments or external assessments can be important as well. And there's a great resource for that, which is the Museum Assessment Program that AAM runs for the Institute of Museum and Library Services. And there's a general assessment, there's one on community engagement, on collections care, there's 4 or 5 of them. And you don't have to do them all for the accreditation process, but you may find in your planning that there's an appropriate year to get that assessment. And that's a grant program, and those are paid for by MLS through AAM. So please check them out. You should also look at local, regional, and national trends. Look at community needs assessments if you've done one. They will tell you, I think, what you want to know, what they want to see. You may find that when you ask people for advice, you may also get collections donations or even cash support. You should list what you think is unknown about the future, what keeps you up at night, and identify big issues that you should talk through as you make your plan. There's a method called appreciative inquiry, or building on strengths, that says that you start out with the things that work the best already, and that's part of your self-assessment, and then consider why they work, and then anything that isn't in that category you might put on the table to discuss how you would improve it, or perhaps expand it or eliminate it. Now here's a sample process, and this generally, something of a timeline like this would probably take, again, 3 to 5 months. And the data gathering can start anytime you're ready. It often takes a lot of time for an initial retreat because everyone's schedule differs, and it might be hard to get 20 people in the same room, but it's a very important part. Again, document your process, communicate the results of your meetings. Someone needs to mute right now. Mike, I'm getting background. Thanks. And then your initial draft from a retreat, your goals and strategic objectives. Many of you have very well-defined goals already, but your plan will help you to outline the strategies that will help you reach them. The board and staff discussions or the governing body discussions and work sessions, very important. And I'm finding with museums of all kinds, the staff and the governing body haven't even necessarily met before. In a small community, yes, they're probably even related sometimes. But that's some of the richest conversation takes place when you level out the hierarchies and talk as people around the table. Very important to assess the resources you need and the responsibilities that will have to come along with those. And I think that'll get reinforced in other webinars in this series. The goals and strategic objectives presented for board discussion, a final plan, and then a communication plan to your stakeholders, whether that's on your website or in social media or in mailings, however you do that. And I think it's important that that you consider what you're trying to inspire, what fire do you want to light with that communication plan. And then keeping in mind your 4 or 5 year plan, how you coordinate with your annual budgets and how you budget additional if it hasn't been in the budgets, or if you need to massage your budget to reflect the new projects or the new priorities. This is very simplistic, but just a very skeleton outline of how you might list your goals. I've seen over the last 20 years, it's probably not possible to have more than 4 or 5. It's hard to keep track of anything like that. For some folks, it might only be 3. For some, organizational development would be expressed probably as, seeking AAM accreditation. They do it, and but it's that's just an outline. You'll see in some of the sample plans how that plays out when it's fully fleshed. Particularly the full-blown strategic plan for the Huhugam Heritage Center, Gila River Indian Community in Arizona. Some other tools, you might charter committees to look at specific issues, internal and external, whether that's organizing for a building committee, or looking seriously at how you're going to do curation collaborations. And there will be in the resource files, the excuse me, the curation collaboration plan for the Chikluna folks in Alaska is a very good example of that, and that'll be in your resource files also. You may have to commission studies if you want to know in detail the answers to some question, whether that's a feasibility study for a capital campaign, something like that you may have to commission. There are other examples of strategic plans at the AAM Information Center. Other community organizations are usually willing to share, places like United Way or the food bank. They may not be exactly oriented to your subject matter, but they might have interesting formats and ways of presenting. And certainly, I've never run across a museum that wouldn't share its plans with, at least at the top level of goals and objectives, that wouldn't share with a museum. So you might pursue that as well. And you know who's in your neighborhood. You may have peers in mind. You may be part of, I think ATOM will be a good source going forward for this sort of stuff. Again, I mentioned the Huhugam Heritage Center. That's a very well done full plan, and you'll see that they've incorporated cultural values and look on language terms in their work, and I think that that is a good example for you. And they work very closely with their tribal council, and it's been a great effort for them. The Chickaloon Village, again, is a great example of thinking inside and outside the community, in this case for locating and agreeing on commitments to curation of collections from that community. Now, something that has gotten very popular these days is to have a one-page summary of your strategic plan that you can hand out to people, and it explains things very clearly. The Alutiiq Museum is a very good one in that it has a one-pager that focuses on values and traditions as a guiding light for achieving the work that they want to get done. I'm waiting to get permission to put that in the resource file when we get that. The Reach Museum is, I picked that because it's northwest. It's in the Hanford Reach in central Washington, and therefore part of the general Northwest approach to history and resources. They've done a great job there. They're not a tribal museum, but they work with tribes closely. They're a public partnership between a foundation, a public utilities district, and their own nonprofit. Archaeology Southwest is worth looking at because they're strictly an educational and a research organization. I put them in here because they are, along with Native American Rights Fund and and Utah Diné Bikia, are leading the fight to preserve Bears Ears. And so very important work that they're doing. I recommend you check those out. A lot of organizations now will put the one-pager on their website rather than and maybe saving the full plan to share with their funders. One of the tools that's very useful, particularly if you might think you're isolated, a relationship matrix and different kinds of partnerships you might have. Those that you'll do programs with and for, those that will sponsor you, those that might, and I've done this in my own institutions in the past, where you might have your front line, your public facing people training in hospitality programs with your local casinos or hotels. And then there's contracting partners where you might well provide services for others on contract to care for collections, to do research, and so forth. You'll find very specific definitions of those in the resource file. Something that has to happen eventually in almost every institution is that you have to take the responsibilities from your plan, identify the tasks and the responsibilities, and then identify the ultimate responsibility. Where does the buck stop? But then delegate responsibility back so that not everything has to go through a 10-step approval process. That's hard to do in systems sometimes, but if you're a standalone, depending on your governance, whether it's a tribal council or a business council, or if it's a standalone nonprofit, it's good to make sure that everyone knows what they can do and what they need to ask for further delegation on. And there's a document in the resource folder that's a Word doc. That's a partnership matrix that you can use with your planning group to figure out who you're already working with in those partnership areas, who you might want to be working with in those partnership areas. And I worked with a small museum in Shoshone, California that, there's like 40 people in the town, two-room museum, and they came up with 40 potential partners within 50 miles. So, it makes a good couple-hour exercise to get everybody thinking on it. Probably the most important piece, another Word doc that you'll find in your resource files, is the Strategic Objectives Worksheet. After you've identified your big goals, for each of those goals, you'll want to fill out this worksheet. And you might have 1 or 2 strategies, you might have 15 strategies, but for each one, you want to ask yourself those other 5 questions. What's going to happen if we do this? And how will we know that we did it? So how are you going to measure that? And then who's responsible, whether that's an individual person or it's a curatorial department, it still has to be defined. And of course, everyone wants to know what things cost, and that's going to have something to do probably with when should it happen. And there may be enough to begin with that you're only saying this should happen next year or the second year or the year after. And again, that will help you see what your milestones need to be. Some of the kinds of things that people measure, both quantitative and qualitative, you can count visitors, you can count budgets, you can count all of that. At a higher level, the qualitative things come into place. Do you have your plans in place, and do you update them regularly? Do you manage budgets well? I hope you can't see that when my email wants me to enter my password. Do you accomplish your annual goals? When you do an evaluation every year on your plan, have you accomplished the things you set out to do that year? Do you evaluate your board? Does it evaluate itself and your director and staff? Do you do evaluations so you keep your people all involved and on track? If you do periodic surveys in your community for feedback on programs, very important. And do you keep track of the good things that happen to you? Good press, awards from other organizations or from your community. Now, there was a very popular trend in the business community to measure good to great, and finally nonprofits said, well, that doesn't apply to us. Well, Jim Collins went back and said, there are 3 measures of greatness for nonprofits and for museums. Do you achieve and surpass your goals every year? Does your community recognize and do you inspire them? And do you have high performance and growth of programs and people over time? These are really good aspirational goals, I think, as you measure them. Now, you may well ask why planning doesn't work sometimes. And it's pretty simple. If you ignore your stakeholders, that's not good. If you have a slapdash process, that's not good. If you don't know why you're doing it, not good. If no one knows what their real responsibility is, that's a challenge. If you have unrealistic and unsustainable goals and objectives, if you set the goals too high, you're never going to reach them. If you set them too low, you're not going to reach them either. And probably the biggest barrier to success is complacency regarding the implementation. You really need to not rest on your laurels for a minute. And also, if you don't have a mechanism to review and to renew your plan, review it every year, and probably every third or fourth year, stretch it out for another 3 or 4 years. It's really hard to do budgeting for more than 2 or 3 years. Um, and again, things might have changed in your universe. And that's the main thing, is to keep your eye on it and stay after it for sure. And I think that at this point, Melissa will take any questions that you've had, and we'll try to answer them. And I'll get off of screen.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Art. We appreciate that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I thought I would show all of you the web resources that Art was referencing. Let's see. All right, can you see, let's see. So on this page, oh, the back one. So as you'll see, the website for all of the Culture Builds community planning resources is atom.org/node//440. And then we've broken it down per webinar. Art was, he pointed out the Chickaloon collaborative curation model, and I thought, not to put her on the spot, but I thought maybe Selena might want to talk about it a little bit. If she doesn't want to, it's totally fine, but I know you're on the webinar, and I kind of pulled up the document here for everyone to see that.
Sure.
Okay. Like I said, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's totally fine. Actually, this is relatively new for us. We're in the process of finishing up a digitization cohort with Washington State University's Center for Digital Scholarship and Curation. And one of the first things that we did in the early months of the cohort was create a bunch of foundational documents and plans to help us with our digitization practices. The overall goal of the cohort was to establish collaborative curation partnerships with different repositories across the United States. And it culminated with a trip we took to DC this last February, where we got to go and meet the staff and look at collections that were relevant to our tribes. So to be able to maneuver through that process efficiently, we had developed months ahead of time this collaborative curation model, and this one is for our tribe specifically. We're very fortunate to have partnerships with several museums in our region, so we made sure that we included them in it, as well as the fact that we seem to be a little bit more organized than some of the other OTNA groups in our region. So we took it into consideration that we want to kind of help them as well when we're finding things in other repositories, just because they don't have the resources to do so. So we made sure to also include them, which is why you'll see Dene groups. And the process is really designed to start planning when you're at home before you actually go and visit repositories, and have a clear idea of the takeaways you want, the research and planning you want to do ahead of time, as well as the exchange that you want to take place. So for us, collaborative curation is not only us getting back cultural knowledge. We always strive to get original copies, which as we all know, is very difficult. So we've been accepting digital surrogates, but at the same time, correcting records that are in other repositories. We have found, as I'm sure you all have, a lot of things are misidentified, not described accurately, or have attributions that are actually not for your own cultural group. So for us, it's really about not us just getting back cultural knowledge, but as I mentioned before, really educating the repositories and those staff that work at them on a better exchange of ideas and knowledge.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Selena. And so, like I said, you'll find that on your planning resources. And when you go back, let's see, I'll show you. And so then we also have the resources that Art provided for today, the different strategic plan that he was referencing, and all additional reading. So, let's see. So now, do we have any questions? You're welcome to unmute yourself and ask questions of Art or us.
Can I be heard?
Yes,
Yep.
we can hear you.
What was that atom.org/node
Sure.
something?
Yeah, I'll pull it back up. No
Yeah.
problem.
Tim, that was in the email you got yesterday. There was a link to this, I think.
Yes,
Okay.
and I can send another follow-up with link, but here's the web page. It's node/440.
And we'll continue to add resources there as they become available. And if any of you have resources that you would like to share, like Selena shared that wonderful one, please feel free to send them to us and we will add them to the website.
TALM.
Melissa, are you pulling up questions? Because I had a question of Art.
Yes, go for it.
Art, how is it that strategic planning informs building a cultural center?
Really, can you hear me?
Not well.
How's this? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes.
It really is a baseline for organizing what you want to have in the end product. And it makes it a whole lot easier if you've got a good plan when you're working with architects and funders to find the means to build your center. And I know that later in this series, you'll have some very specific advice from another speaker on how to manage the process of getting the building built. But if you know the big ideas of where you're going, it really is a help to get started. Because you've done all the work on what your community needs, then you're going to have a better product as you work to create the ultimate facility. Your values and traditions and cultural interests can inform the design and the construction of your facility.
Thank you.
All right, is there any other questions?
Would you go ahead and click on one of those, like the Reach Museum, just so that people can see what I'm talking about with
Sure.
the one-pager?
There you go.
Yeah, there you can see this is how that particular organization puts its mission and vision out front, its major goals, and then all the things they're going to do over the next few years to accomplish those. And it's the kind of thing that's easy to hand to people, it's the kind of thing that everyone should have in their notebook. And there's all different styles. This one was designed to go along with their full plan, which had a lot of artwork in it. And, but that's just one of the examples. I think you'll, when we put the Lutic plan in there later, you'll find that they on one page, they focus on 4 or 5 main cultural values in their own language that instruct a way of being. And I think that's impressive also. Thanks.
No problem. All right, any other questions or comments? or anything you want to share?
Hi, this is Jessica Winstaffer with Chickaloon Native Village. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Jessica.
Good morning. Well, it's morning where we are. I wanted to just say thank you to Art because much of what he presented on I've heard before, but I really appreciated his emphasis on evaluation. And I feel that that hasn't been done by our tribe enough. So it was good to hear the encouragement to do that on an annual basis and kind of the details of that. So thank you for highlighting that, Art.
Sure. And you got a nice helper there this morning too.
Yes, suffice it to say that Art is a god.
Well, we were so fortunate to have him as part of this program, definitely. All right, do we have any other questions? Okay, well, if not, then I think we'll go ahead and conclude the webinar, and I look forward to seeing you all next Wednesday. And if you have any questions or any resources you want to share, feel free to email them to me. And until then, be well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Art.
Thank you.